so let me quickly get last week's minutes. Sorry, I should have- Okay, so let's just see. There is a few carryovers from last week's minutes on this week's minute or agenda. Let's see. Which is the appraisal cost. We will get into that for the 504s. Also the sales analysis, that's on this agenda. And the update on the tax exemption pilot. So we'll just, I think everything looks okay. There's really no need for any follow-up on last week's minutes except for what's in this week's agenda. So first off, there's the 2021 warrant for motor vehicle and the notice of commitment that needs to be signed. I don't know if you guys want to sign it now.
It's already been signed.
Oh, already signed, okay.
Tammy, you want it?
Thank you.
I wonder why we don't see it. Okay, so number 3, we got the invoice in from RRC for the 504 utilities that we talked about last week, and it's $4,000. Initially, it had come in at 6,000, but I called him. I was in panic. I called him and I said, I remember our initial conversation. It was supposed to be 6,000 to begin with, but because we have a very small utility, he said that he would literally throw that in with the other 2 and charge us 4,000. So I called him back, he revised the invoice, and we indeed did get charged 4,000. And what we had talked about last week was to transfer what was left in our budget from fiscal 21 into fiscal 22. And that would have left us with the 4,000, we were going to get that from another available source that wasn't in our budget. But I think we can actually, when everything was moved over, the only amount, we're like $700 short. So I think we can actually pull it from, without being short for fiscal 22, I think we can take it out of our own budget instead of them having to do like a reserve fund transfer, because I'm not going to school this year and that's typically around $600-700. So if we are short on this, I guess, in our budget at the very end, then we can, look into it. But I think we can cover the whole 4,000 with what we transferred over and what we have in our current fiscal 22 without making us short on anything.
So Michael, you previously discussed this with Michael Nels.
Yes.
And Michael said, don't worry about it. We can get it from your.
Right, initially it was when we're doing the budget or coming up with the budgets, I put it in as a potential article, that this needs to be raised on the town meeting for this specific amount. And we had a discussion that wouldn't be needed. That the money would be found or taken from we do have an account called appraisal services that has had money in it. We've been putting $500 away each year, but what we found out is that money hasn't been transferred over. Right, so basically it went into the general fund at the end of the fiscal year. So, but we still have that 500 that was voted in for this year or for fiscal year 22. We can use that towards it too. So with that 500 and the amount that we transferred from the accounts, we really are short by around 700, which we can take out of in-state meetings and travel, and the whole thing will be covered.
Yeah. Well, since you've got it pre-approved from Michael, I guess we don't need to worry about it.
Okay.
Take it out of whatever.
And I will talk to Cheryl because she's aware of the amounts that we transferred over. Let's see, we also received, number 4, the approval from the state on Gateway for the exemption reimbursements, which is just the typical thing we do every year to, when the cherry sheets come through, when we're doing our tax rate, they will indicate to us that we were reimbursed for the exemptions that were given out last year for the different types of clauses that we have, the statutory clauses for exemptions. So that's done. We got the notice for that. Number 5, the CL1 form on Gateway is due on the 15th. That is a form that typically myself and the accountant work on. And Cheryl being new, I will step her through the process, because basically all it is the state wants to know how much money we raised last year for the community preservation fund and how much adjustments were made through abatements or exemptions, because whenever there's an abatement or exemption, if the valuation changes, because the CPA is based on that, we will adjust it. So we actually will change that amount. I will do the form for her and go over it with her, and we'll submit it. Typically Ray would handle this, and then he would just say, go in and submit it, and I will double check the numbers. But again, she's new, and this will be the first form that we'll be working on together. There's gonna be many more to come when we're dealing with the tax rate. So I'll work on that, again, due on the 15th, we do have time for that. The number 6, we just got the fiscal 22 estimated cherry sheet numbers from the DOR. And again, these are estimated, it's probably gonna change before we get to the actual tax rate. It's not that different than what we typically get. We usually get below 200,000 in receipts from the state, and our charges that we have to pay out is typically around 40,000, and it's 44,000 this year. Again, that could change. Yeah, I'm sure it will. This is the first round that I've actually seen that they've sent us. So that might be different in a few months by the time we actually submit everything.
So these are subject to change?
Yeah, absolutely, yep. I don't know how far along the state is with finalizing those numbers, but typically around July, August, we receive an estimate of what it's gonna be. I know the last few years, it's pretty much stayed the same from what they've sent us. So that would be the number, or pretty close to the number, that we will put on the recap sheet for local aid that we get from the DOR. That doesn't include anything that has to do with COVID. You know, that those funds that have been issued, that is not part of what we do in here. That's more of an administrative item as to what's gonna happen with the COVID money that's come through.
Yeah, there's been a lot of discussion in the news recently about the state-owned lands and how they reimburse.
Yes, I did see that. I read that article.
Yeah, and so I mean, so the total receipts from the state is about 189,000, of which 46,000 is state-owned lands.
Yep, state-owned land was usually something that I had to do during a reval to prove to the state that we actually did what they wanted us to do. But the thing is, with state-owned land, we have a land schedule and we have a valuation method that we use to value land. They have their own. So they would come in and say, here's the list of the state-owned land properties. I would verify that we have those. And then I would have to do a separate valuation schedule to come up with the amounts. Then they would reimburse us for those amounts. But they had final approval on those, and but what happened a few years ago is they no longer have assessors value that land. We have a value on the land, but we don't actually use a different land schedule. They get a listing of our valuations, and their method of payment is based on what they're doing now. We don't do it in-house, but like you said, there's been complaints because those numbers seem to be really low.
So the state-owned land we have in Stockbridge would be like the turnpike?
Yep, there's things that are under fisheries and wildlife, you know, things like that. There's some
So
land.
like the Stockbridge Bowl, would they?
No.
No, that's not on there.
But
We have a list.
So
I can
waterways
show
are
you.
on.
there
No,
are mountains, quite a lot of.
yep,
So there's
that's on
some.
there. There's some up on east where the wetlands are. There's some properties there.
You know,
And again, I will say it's a very odd method of valuation because you had to come up with base lot, you had to come up with a potential developable lot, and you had to come up with rear lot. And I've never liked the way that they did it. I'm glad that they took it away from us, but not glad that the values or the reimbursement amounts are coming in. There definitely needs to be more discussion as to their valuation methods and the reimbursement of those lands. I don't see it anymore. It's kind of like a payment in lieu of taxes where if there's no set agreement, then there'll be a check that comes through. And it will probably be either on the cherry sheets or it'll be, I thought it was a separate payment that came through, but I would have to check.
I remember recently, on October Mountain, there was quite a controversy in that the town of Washington was getting far less money per acre than the town of Lee.
Yeah, I know.
And some of it was on property, right next.
Contiguous
Yeah.
property.
Contiguous property.
I know that for anyone that has a Canvas system, we all do as assessors that come up with our values after we do all the analytical work, it pretty much went against what is established in our systems. And we were required, and any assessor will say that, state-owned land was difficult to do because you had to come up with the number that the state approved, but then you had to figure out a way to take that number and get it into your valuation system. So that the numbers would match. There's no tax bill that goes out, but there's still a reimbursable amount that comes through. And we don't do that anymore. They took it completely out of the hands of the assessors. It gave us a whole bunch of other things that we have to do, but that part itself is now done at the state level, sort of like the valuations of the like the pipeline and Verizon wireless. Those are different, those are taxable. So again, I think this is more relatable to a pilot program. It's a state pilot program of which none of us have any control over right now. And that's why you're seeing those articles about maybe the unfairness. I mean, I haven't really looked at the they don't send the values anymore. They just send the amount for the taxes. So it's a little bit hard to prove where the numbers lie with what we value. But I know the last time that I valued the state-owned land was fiscal year 15. Fiscal year 18 was the year that they started doing it themselves. But it definitely should have a little bit more investigative work to see what the values are. I can request to see where those values are coming from. And I think they give it to us as a total. And you have to request the breakdown. So I'll look to see if I can find the breakdown.
So the state-owned land would be the turnpike, it would be the forest that we're talking about, would it be this town, the state-owned roads? State-owned railroad system? Because now the state owns the railroad.
I think it could be, I mean, unless, again, I haven't seen the updated listing. I just know that when I was valuing it in-house, it was strictly land that, that we would basically consider like conservation land.
So previously, when the Stockbridge Railroad was privately owned, was that under tax rolls?
For which one?
The railroad? I don't remember.
No, that's exempt.
So I wonder why it's exempt.
Yeah, we've always had that as being exempt. So it might be on that list now. I would have to check and see.
I'd be curious when the state bought that.
It's one of those things like with a lot of the exempt properties that we have.
They paid $11 million.
Yeah.
They did, not too long ago.
No, so I'd be curious to see if that's state-owned land, if we got a bump or we should.
Yeah, I'll have to ask
Good
our
point.
field advisor if he can get that list for us, because again, they send an email saying the state-owned land is available, but you see it as a total, and I'll have to just go and see if I can get a breakdown of what's in there.
I mean, again, looking at how much they're spending on upgrading the tracks, I mean, they're spending,
Oh, I know, they're
Millions
doing it up
and
in North
millions.
Adams too.
and so if, just like if the telephone company, improve the infrastructure, the railroads.
Yes.
Infrastructure is being
Yep.
vast.
So we'll look into that a little further. I did read that. I just read that article. That was very interesting.
And what about the public access ramp that state that owns also, is that?
That's exempt. That might be on this, I think that's on the state.
So you call it exempt on our
Right, it's,
system,
there's
but
no,
we still get reimbursed.
Yes.
Here.
yeah, that's why
That's what
it's
I'm
more of
asking
a,
about.
it's more of a pilot than it is. Yeah, and again, it's one of those things like, I relate it to us not really seeing what we get for the rooms tax or, you know, the meals tax. If there should be a breakdown of some sort instead of just the check that comes into the town. You know, because at any time they could throw that back on us where we have to value it again, just like what happened with the utility companies. You know, God forbid if it's ever like we talked about before, the Tennessee Gas Pipeline or the Verizon Wireless, where we literally would be valuing every telephone pole, you know, in town. And there was rumors that that was coming, but that was a long time ago. But you never know. You know, you just, you know, we don't want to have contracts all over the place with appraisals, you know, or having to have appraisals done on everything. But it seems like that might be the way that it's going, and it's difficult for smaller communities to budget for those items, you know, and state-owned land was always something that I know assessors were always a bit scared of, because we have to run with something that goes against how we value property. And again, it's the state telling us, this is how we want you to do this, and we did it, you know, all those years.
But Doug's point about the bowl and the public access rent, both of which are exempt, but could be eligible from the state, the pilot. I mean, it seems to me that the town spends a considerable amount of money both on treatment of the lake or
Oh my
harvesting.
goodness, yes.
And police presence at the access ramp.
Mm-hmm.
Those should all be arguments why.
Sure. Yeah, we need to see the breakdown, what, and I'll do a little bit more digging and see if I can get that. Yep. And again, if other communities are complaining about it, it's definitely something to look into. I mean, we don't want to be shortchanged at all.
It might be good, for instance, to see what they get for Laurel Lake of the city.
I think when they send the cherry sheets through, you can do a drop down. It lists every community. So if you want to look at Stockbridge, I usually just go to Stockbridge and print like this. Everyone's on it. You know, look at the cherry sheet numbers. They're all on it for the 351 communities. And I'll have to check the state on it. I think they list it for everybody. So I might be able to pull all the surrounding communities and we can go over them at a meeting. Yep. Number 7, that's the best one. So I finished the sales analysis for fiscal year 22, which will inevitably produce the tax bills that go out in the fall. And I will, in all honesty, say it was one of the most difficult reviews of the sales in Stockbridge that I think I have ever encountered. And I mean, it's no big surprise that last year is our target year for the fiscal year 22 assessments. And it was the market, as Doug can attest to, and pretty much, you know, anyone that's been paying attention, our sales were pretty high. And I'm not saying in all categories, because we do stratify the sales into many different categories before we run everything by land use code. And I will say that, and I don't want to alarm anybody, but this is what happens when we study the market in Stockbridge or any other community in Massachusetts. Last year was definitely a different type of year, and the amount of sales and the amount of those sales was substantial. And again, there's some categories where I feel there was no rhyme or reason, and that's when you have to make a judgment call. But if you were to look at the sales, if anyone from the public were to come in and look at the sales from last year, they would see that the majority of them were higher than the assessment that we had on record. So certification standards, the Department of Revenue require us to look at our valuations and look at the sales and do an analytical period study, which we did do, which will show us where our base rates lie, where our land sits with what's happening out in the market. I didn't look at any sales that happened in 2019. There's no need to look at 2 years worth of sales. That's just gonna throw things off an incredible amount, because you're gonna have 1 year that's not COVID related, and another year that's completely COVID related. And so we had enough sales in 1 year to justify only using 1 year. And so that's what we will end up submitting. But there is, and I do want to make it known, and I don't have final values, and I cannot give out final values right now until the state certifies them. But there will be increases in valuations for fiscal year 22.
But with that being said, just because there's increase in valuation does not mean there's an, in theory, if the spending is exactly the same, that means that the valuations go up, but the assessment per thousand will go down.
Yes, I'm thinking, and again, it's all preliminary, but I'm thinking our tax rate
Maybe
could be at a record low.
So with.
Right, it should be, if everything works the way it's supposed to, and we're like you said, keeping the budget, and I'm pretty sure, I haven't gotten those final numbers, but it didn't look like it was excessive at all.
Right, so the tax rate is really set by the budget of the town based on spending.
Yep.
And just because the assessments go up, in theory, your tax bill might go down.
Absolutely, and that has to be stressed 1,000 times over, to not be alarmed until you actually see what your value is and what your tax amount is.
Yeah.
Because the tax rate should be coming down.
Right, so in theory, if the spending was level and the assessment or the valuations all went up,
Yes,
the assessment should go down, and theoretically, everybody would pay the same.
Yep.
But that's not the case, because sometimes certain values or certain classes of homes
yes.
will go up, so a certain class
Yep.
might go up in relative to somebody else.
Right, and I did everything I could to minimize the impact with sales that I just thought were going to throw off the analytical study, and that would be, and I won't get into specific properties, but that would be just, for example, if we had a property assessed for 3 million and we saw a sale that was 6 or 7 million, there is nothing in our system that is going to get that value that we have that high. I mean, there are triggers, we'll look at the grades again. We will look at all the construction detail. We send out sales questionnaires to try to understand what happened with this sale. Did you overpay? Was this, and actually, and again, I can't mention specifics, but there were several sales questionnaires that said, I paid this because of COVID. I've never seen that before, probably will never see that again in my life, but specifically said, this caused the sale price to be this much. And that can be detrimental on a study where there's 40 sales.
And with that being said, just because something sold for X doesn't mean the assessment's automatically going to be changed to the same sale price. So
right,
it could go both ways. You could have underpaid or overpaid.
Yes.
Just because you bought or sold something, you bought something doesn't mean the assessment will change to that amount.
Right, and it was the difficult part always in doing the sales analysis is you trying to be within the range that the state allows, and knowing that, let's say, for example, if your modern contemporary styles have 5 sales that were above the former assessment, but you've got 3 or 4 sales that came in lower, you have to make a call and say, all right, is this, you look at your sales questionnaires, you look to see, are there any that are going to impact this subgroup? That's why the state makes us run everything by, they want it submitted by land use, so all your 101s are in one group, all your condos are in another, commercial and so forth. But they also want you to be within the limits that they require on all your subcategories. So they'll have us run it by neighborhood code, year built, I have to stratify we'll run it by sale date, sale price, and just an example of how crazy the market was when I ran it by sale price, our low was 214,000, our high was 2,375,000. That's the market that we deal with in Stockbridge. I know we're not the only ones. Other communities nearby, I'm sure, are going through it. They may have more sales, but for 1 year having 40 sales, we could barely get 40 sales in 2 years. So that to me is impressive. And again, I think it's everything that happened last year, and to some extent is still happening right now. I won't go along with the argument that, everything's dropping off right now. So when people get their tax bills, it's going to be an inflated number. We can only work on 1 year at a time, and our assessment date is January 1st of this year. It's everything that happened before that date, and that's what was studied, that's what will be submitted to the DOR. And there was no choice in not making adjustments to the base rates at this point. There was no way that we were going to get our assessments in the range that are allowable by the DOR, whether it's 90% to 110%. There was just, when I started the initial study, we had ratios that were almost 200% over market value. And those have to conform, you have to be within 90 to 110% of market value. That means initially when I saw that, oh boy, there is going to be an adjustment to some of these base rates that we've never seen before. And it's scary, but at the same time, like Doug said, if the calculation is correct, the tax rate will go down because you're picking up a lot of extra value in your tax levy. So there's no need for the tax rate to be at the level that it was last year. And if everything works out right with the budgets and our receipts coming through, which I think should be a lot better than they were last year because things did open, we should be, that calculation, that balancing act should work. Do I want to say what the tax rate is going to be? Honestly, I don't even know yet. I won't know for at least a month where we are with that.
So Mike, so going back, so our 2022 values are based on the values of homes as of 1/1/2021, correct?
Yep.
And then, so you're looking at all of your analysis is from 1/1/2020 through 12/31/2020.
Exactly.
So the thing is also what we have to realize is that by the time the tax bills get sent out in October or whatever, the data that you're using is very old.
Right.
So in a very increasing market, the valuations might continue to climb because you're using data that's could be 18 months old.
Yes.
And so in an increasing market, the values might rise, and when it starts going down again, it's like a bell. It takes a little bit of time for the values to go back down.
Right. We need, the sales analysis might take me a week, but the actual gathering all the sales questionnaires that we send out, which are an amazing help. When you're looking at a subgroup of property, and there just might be one sale that you don't want to make it an outlier. You want to keep as many sales in as you possibly can. I will go to my sales questionnaires, which I do appreciate that the public will actually send those back. And that could be enough to actually say, you can't be using that sale in the study. They're telling you, the buyer is telling you that this is what happened during the transaction that I was not privy to. And that leads us to take that sale out. And I will say most of the time when that happens, it conforms. So the market is a wonderful thing. It is the tool that we use, and it may not be a popular thing, but people do have to realize that assessors really only have one tool, and that's the market. That is what we use for everything. It is, if it's going to be a comparison of neighbor to neighbor, you have to compare your property to the same type of property, not just your neighbor's property. We work on categorizing everything into, and there are some mistakes that occur with maybe categorizing a house differently than, what it should be, but we'll do everything in our power to correct that. But there is a vetting process that happens. The sales analysis takes about a week. The vetting process starts January 1st. And it's just months of seeing what's happening. And what I will do now is once I recalculate the entire community with the new values, I will then keep track of what's coming through this year to see how close we are to what happened last year. And the best case scenario is that they're coming in pretty close. I mean, and we'll see, and we'll follow that through. I know so far this year, we've still had record number of sales in Stockbridge, and they've been still pretty high, but you still get some that come through and you really wonder, but before doing your vetting process, that how did this possibly happen? I mean, was there some type of circumstance involved in this that even with the sales questionnaire, I don't know of? And if that happens, we do call it an outlier, but what happens with outliers is I want to stress to the public that we just won't eliminate your sale if we feel it's not fitting. We have to prove to the Department of Revenue why we did that.
Yeah.
There's a process involved, and they want to make sure that if it's a sale that we can use, that we're using it.
So Michael, could you just comment about this? So the sales analysis that you did must be reviewed by the state.
Yes.
And I think it's important for you to talk about.
Yeah, when we're done with or getting close to setting the tax rate, there's a process. We actually have to submit all of our sales on the gateway system, which is an electronic version of approving all of our information that we do, everything that we do in this office before we can get the tax rate set. I actually double check and triple check all of my ratios and my studies, because once they get submitted to the Department of Revenue, they then run the same statistics that I run, and if they're just 1 point off from the amount that if we're submitting a 90% or 97% ratio, which is our assessments to the market value, and they run the statistics and it's coming out to 0.89, I redo the entire thing and it holds up the tax rate and it holds up the valuations. I always make sure that once I submit things that it matches exactly what they see. But they will, if they see a subclass, they'll say, okay, run your waterfront property. I want to see where that's coming in. Well, they know that I've already run those waterfront properties in that ratio. The rule with the Department of Revenue is if your 101s, which are your single families, is at 97%, all of your subcategories and your waterfront have to be within 5 points either below or above. If they're not, they make you redo it. So there is a huge set of standards that we have to uphold, which is the certification standards every single year. It's not just during the revals. It is any community that's not running a standard sales analysis, they're doing a disservice to their community, and I'm not sure how they actually can't do that. I mean, we they're interim adjustments. We call them interim adjustments. And I know that when I submit, it's as close to market value as it possibly can be as of January 1st. And again, once you get your tax bill and you see your valuation, there's no reason we can't look at what's happening now, but we will still refer back to the sales that occurred for this period, because we're a semi-annual community. So there's 2 bills that go out. We have to have the bills and the tax rate prepared for the fall. We cannot go into the next year and have an estimated valuation. We have to have a true valuation. So I'll be spending this week and next week getting the valuations into the gateway and starting the whole process of verification with the state. We still have the personal property that has to be done, but right now I think we're in a good situation to submit for classification and the tax rate probably around the same time that we did last year. And it'd be nice to have the classification as early as we possibly can, and to get the tax bills out. And we have a few new employees here that haven't been involved in the tax rate process or sending out the bills, so I wanna have enough time to be able to help them out, so we can run this smoothly. But I think we're in good shape as far as getting the value set. We have the utilities finished, personal property will be put in the system, all the second home. That is another thing that will change, is there's a possibility that the second homeowner values for the second home amounts will change a little bit, because that's based on the building value. But again, it shouldn't be anything,
What was that again?
the second homeowners pay on the personal property.
So the personal property is percentage based on
The
value.
building value.
Building value.
So there is I wanna make it clear that it may not be just the real estate that changes. We have 658 second homeowner accounts that will possibly be adjusted as well, but that's not unusual. That's a procedure that's done after the values are set. And we make sure that we rerun those new numbers, and it is not going to be something that is going to send up a bunch of alarms. It's just a procedure. It will be a small change in the valuations for those. Next year, we will be sending out form of lists to every second homeowner requesting a listing of their furnishings, and nobody likes to do it. I would not like to do it, but it is a state procedure. And we found out this year, because I thought we were gonna have to do it this year, but they reminded me, we will throw it into your reval next year. So most likely January, February, those will be going out. I just want that to go out there, that those will be in the mail to all the second homeowners. And we are just, asking for your help in filling out those forms, and you can call us and we can help you through it. Because the new second homeowners, they may not have ever seen those forms before. We only send them out every 6 years.
And so, Michael, if we don't comply with that, the state will not approve our tax rate. Is that a good step?
Absolutely. All these things that we're talking about are all the steps involved in getting to the tax rate. Next year is a whole different ball game, because we're in a full state certified revaluation next year, and it's every 5 years. It used to be every 3 years. And I don't anticipate any problems, but revaluations, depending on who is the commissioner, depending on who's the head of the Bureau of Local Assessment, of which we have a new commissioner that just started, and we're hoping to actually get this person to come to our fall meeting for the Berkshire County Assessors Association, so we can get a sense of what's coming for us down the road, and we'll know a lot better. Because as assessors, it's always about what's gonna be required during the reval, because revaluations are so important. And this, anyone that takes over that job may have a whole list of things that we weren't previously doing that they want us to do now. And we'll just go with the flow and see what happens. But I wanna just get people prepared as we go throughout the rest of the year. I mean, there could be changes coming, hopefully we remain open and can still have meetings. Again, this is a test, the way we're doing it right now, and I hope it works. But going forward, there could be changes again. And that's another thing. That's why another thing is, if we can get these things done quickly, the valuations, the tax rate, will be in a much better place if something happens to one of us here, with not being with the tax. We do everything in-house here for the tax bills. So, we're all working together to get those bills out, and it's very important that no one wants to get their tax bill, that's understandable, but it's very important that the Stockbridge continues having its financial needs met by having a good money flow. And that only happens when the tax bills go out. So I think we're on a good path right now without any unforeseen issues. I don't think there'll be anything that crops up during the submission of everything, but if there is, I'll make everyone aware of it immediately. And Tom, I put that tax exempt pilot program on, and I did want to mention one thing. I know we had talked about at one of our meetings, is it through the Community Preservation Act of, or where the town can purchase the exempt parcels that come up? For example, like with the Sisto School, I'm just wondering, did that get brought up before? Is there any such a thing?
No, what the Community Preservation Act has done is has considered purchasing the development. rights,
Just the, okay, all right,
so that land keeps its rule.
okay,
But with that being said, any money from the CPA can be used to get the fee or the conservation rights. So you can go either way.
It
There's
could
not,
go either way, there's
Right.
nothing
So,
to
yeah.
prevent it. So
Yeah, you
if
can buy
it was a property that really felt should be in the public domain,
okay, so it has to be open space,
yeah. And that
okay.
could be the town owned, or I think the town could then transfer to Laurel Hill.
What if it's a historical property that comes on the market? Can that be purchased too?
As far as I know, it could be.
well, especially if it falls into like, low income or, it depends on what the property could be used for in the future. If it was being used for low income housing or whatever, I think it might, if it doesn't fit in open space, it might fit into that.
Okay,
And if a town, for instance, were to buy a historic building, or what would be required would be for that building to have a historic easement on the property that would be overseen by the Stockbridge Land Trust and
Okay.
or the Berkshire Natural Resources Council. But
so they would have to have something in writing that proves that they're truly historic.
that it's historic and agreeing to putting in conditions that would maintain its historic character.
And the town would actually purchase that property?
Could either one, could
Okay.
purchase the easement, value of the easement, or I think buildings and property would be the same.
Okay.
Either purchase.
That
the
question,
fee
that question
or the
came up
easement.
last week. And I said I would mention it. And I thought that the last one would be the appropriate place to put it.
Yeah. So speaking of the pilot program, I think it may be timely for a little bit of an update here.
Okay,
And also just for a little bit of a review as well. Well, first of all, we've been on pause, as everybody knows, because of the pandemic, but we're looking to become active again after Labor Day. And so for people who don't know, pilot stands for payment in lieu of taxes. And the objective of our committee is to set up a pilot program for the town of Stockbridge, which would basically be a template that we would, or a guideline for how we would view the various nonprofits in terms of their responsibility to help town raise the revenue that we need. And there are a couple other towns or cities in the Commonwealth that do have a pilot program. Most notably is Boston. And we've paid particular attention to Boston, A, because it's been a successful program, and B, because the BSO has signed up with their program. And for us, since the BS Tanglewood is our major not-for-profit entity in the town, we think that's a good starting off point. Basically, in the Boston model, not-for-profits are asked to pay 50% of their assessed value. And of that 50%, half of that, or 25%, can be deducted in terms of services that they provide to the community. So if it's a museum, for instance, free passes to local residents or similar, if it's a health organization, certain clinics, or if it's an entertainment venue, just access to the community that's sort of could be counted as a service to the community, both or educational efforts, things of that sort. So we really do hope to get up and running again. The members of the committee, include myself, Gary Pitney, and Jay Bykowski from the Finance Committee. I think we're open to expanding our committee. I think we particularly will welcome input from second homeowners, 658 properties, because they bear a large burden of our taxes. And they want to see, that this burden is being equitably shared. And also the community, I think it's good get input from our business community that pays full freight, if you will, and the nonprofit community that many of whom have business components. So I think we want to be very inclusive, and I think we want to operate on a consensus basis, and starting off from a basis that we truly value our nonprofits. We want to collaborate with them. We want to just set forward guidelines that are really fair and equitable. Because as things now stand, we have a couple of already in existence, a couple of pilot agreements with nonprofits. And even without the agreements, there are some nonprofits in the town that are fairly generous to the town in terms of payments in lieu of taxes. There are other nonprofits that don't give anything to the town. So I think we want to establish a sort of guidelines that will put the Board of Selectmen in a more favorable position to negotiate pilot agreements. And it would have to be signed off. Those agreements will have to be signed off by the Board of Selectmen.
Yeah, I mean, so one thing too, you mentioned that you're on the committee and Gary's on the committee, but also, I mean, this is not a committee specifically from the Stockbridge Board of Assessors.
No, we were appointed, good point though, we were appointed by the Board of Selectmen.
Yeah.
And I think Gary will agree that we're open to expanding that committee to some extent.
So what we should do is maybe when it shows up on the agenda, we should make it perfectly clear. It should say report from, because it almost looks like it's part of our agenda. And it's this is not really our committee. This is just
we're just an
It's a joint, right?
Yeah, so just, I mean, I think it has to be just clarification that the Stockbridge Board of Assessors is not doing this program. Just a subcommittee is reporting to the assessors.
We're doing it at the behest of the select board.
Okay.
Yes.
Gary, is there any more?
No, I think that you summarized that wonderfully. Very good.
So people should stay tuned and we'll.
And if you're interested, please reach out to us, and we'd like to hear from you.
Absolutely.
So do you want to see if there's any questions?
Sure. Good.
Does anyone have any questions about what was just discussed, or can they have any?
This is Sandy Barron, and I have one question, and that is, could you put in the chat the appropriate email to whom any volunteers should address their interest for this nonprofit pilot program?
I think she was asking for an email address in case somebody did want to participate in that ad hoc committee. So,
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Yes, my personal email, well, I guess it should be the county email, which is tstokes at what is it, Town of Stockbridge?
I don't really use it, so I don't really know.
Gary, do you?
I think it's Thomas. What's your email?
We just have it, assessors@townstockbridge.com.
All right, well, let's just use that one.
Yeah, if you want to send it to assessors@townstockbridge.com, that will change.
Yeah, that way.
At the end of the
that's
year,
a
but-
very good suggestion. Please send it to the assessors, and that way,
And I can forward it to Tom
Yeah,
and Gary.
and Gary,
And
yep.
we can also forward it to,
Jay.
yes, to Jay Bykowski.
Sure, we can do that.
Good suggestion.
Is that the same email? I guess they're not gonna need.
But the
Yeah.
emails are gonna
Thank you very
change.
much. I'll pass that on our our part-time resident listserv, so that anybody who's interested will be able to communicate
you.
with you directly.
Okay, that would be great.
Thank you.
Any other concerns? Or questions?
No.
No? Okay,
Looks like it's two guests.
okay.
All right, great. Well, thank you all for participating today, and